I think the shocker to a lot of people is we've entered here in 2025, and the Fed Atlanta's GDP Now indicator suggests that the first quarter will be down in terms of real GDP growth, down 3% at an annual rate from the fourth quarter to the first quarter. And that has unnerved a lot of people because the economy seemed to be doing fine. So now what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about why we probably are in the last phase of this rolling recession. We've been talking about a rolling recession since the Fed started jacking up interest rates in 2022 for 3 years, a little more than 3 years now. We believe we've been in a rolling recession, and we're coming to the end of it. So that's the good news. The bad news is we do have to go through this process. Bottom line, however, we think after this initial shudder that the equity markets are going to look through whatever the next 6 months holds in terms of economic activity into a future where we see productivity driving real GDP growth at an accelerated rate in an exciting way. And at the same time, inflation continuing to come down because productivity is going up. Productivity is a powerful antidote to inflation. And we think we're probably on the threshold of some of the most important productivity gains in history. So just wanted to set the stage this way. Before we go on, what is happening in these first 6 months of the year? As you know, there was a lot of hope coming out of the election that we were going to be on our way in terms of the equity markets' health and the broadening out of the equity market as a sign of its health. And it has begun. But as always, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So let's talk about the 1 step back. In terms of fiscal policy, from our point of view, the most important proposal out there right now is the $4.5 trillion tax cut that did make it through the House. They passed a budget with a $4.5 trillion tax cut in it. And that's in addition to the $1.9 trillion tax cut that is part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, TCJA. That was scheduled to expire at the end of this year. And we don't think it will expire. This $4.5 trillion is on top of that. Now, you must be wondering what the heck is going on here. That just sounds like a bigger deficit, a bigger hole out there. Well, those numbers are over a 10-year period. But I think one of the most important things we're learning is that the tax rate cuts themselves will be retroactive to January 20th. Now, that's not cast in concrete at all, but we have heard in and around the administration talk of retroactive tax cuts. Why is that so important? Well, we learned from the Reagan Revolution that phasing in tax cuts is a recipe for a very deep recession because people and businesses defer economic activity in order to capture the lower tax rates. And so I think this administration has learned from the Reagan administration that phasing in is not a good idea. So that is very important in terms of information. The Senate version of the budget is not out yet. and then we'll have to go through a reconciliation. I think what's so interesting about the way that President Trump has set this tax cut up is in terms of what people know is going to take place. And I think the president repeated it in his session to Congress this week. No taxes on tips, Social Security, or overtime. Now, those tax benefits are very appealing to the lower and middle class, which tends to benefit from those three sources of income. And so President Trump and team cannot be accused of favoring the rich. I think the other thing we're going to see here is that the threats and actual reality of tariffs, which is causing a lot of consternation. I do not like tariffs. They are tax increases. But I think that the president, and we'll get into this when we go through the charts again, the president is hearkening back to the early days of our country where tariffs actually supported the government. The primary source of income for the government way back then was tariffs. And then, of course, today, tariffs account for very little funding of government spending, and income taxes account for most of it, business and consumer. So now what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about why we probably are in the last phase of this rolling recession. And it is Employment Friday. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the January employment report. It's January. There's a lot of the February employment report. There was a lot of bad weather, a lot of distortions. But if I can give you a few statistics from other reports that have come out recently on unemployment, the Challenger survey shows that layoffs are up more than 100% year over year. This is a very volatile series. But in terms of actual numbers, I think in February, the number was 172,000 layoffs. And if you look at in the context of history, pre or since COVID, that number was in the 50 to 60,000 per month range. So that's a tripling. And then just to compare it to other recessions historically, in 08 and 09 and also 01 and 02, we got to a peak in terms of layoffs of 240,000. So this is getting awfully close to those. In COVID, the peak was understandably 400,000. I don't think we'll get anywhere near there, but that 172,000 put in perspective to 08, 09, and 01, 02. That was the financial crisis and the tech and telecom bust. It says the layoffs are getting up there. We'll also see in the National Federation of Independent Business report next week an indicator showing renewed weakness in employment, where the small business sector has been extremely weak for the last 3 years and is relapsing after a little bit of excitement after the election. We saw the ADP report. It was subpar, 77,000. And the only other thing I'll point out from this report today, government in total did add 11,000 jobs. More than all of them were at the state and local part of the government sector. The federal government lost 10,000 jobs, and we think that number is going to mount considerably. If we're taking a step back and trying to figure out why consumer and business confidence is falling now again, It's because there is a lot of fear associated with this transition from one administration to the other, and some feeling of chaos. And that's the art of negotiation. So we're taking that as such right now. But if you look at all government employment, so federal employment is less than 2% of the employment in the United States, but federal, state, and local combined is closer to 25%. And then you have quasi-government in education and healthcare, and you're talking about a third of the labor force. And so a lot of people are probably wondering, is my job at risk, or is this move shifting spending from the federal sector down towards the states going to help me? So uncertainty certainly is the watchword. The reason education and healthcare are important is if you look over the last 12 months, those two sectors have been responsible for, I think it's 95% of employment creation. And that's a 12-month moving average, but 95%. In the early days of the last administration, those two sectors accounted for only 10% of job gains over a 12-month moving average period. So we're paying very careful attention. And then, of course, there is the concern that technology is going to take jobs. AI is becoming so proficient. We know coding jobs are the number is starting to go down. There are, I'm sure, a lot of entry-level positions that are not opening up because of artificial intelligence and other technologies. So there is a lot of fear on the employment front.
Welcome back to the Market Chronicles, everyone. Can you believe it? We are celebrating our 10th episode already.
Wow, time flies when you're having fun analyzing the markets.
It really does. And speaking of fun, for those of you joining us for the first time on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and join us each week.
That's right. We unpack all the most important information affecting your money and the markets.
Today, we're diving into some really interesting analysis from Cathie Wood. She says a rolling recession has been going on since 2022, and get this.
She thinks we're entering the final phase.
Now, you might be thinking a recession is a recession, right?
Yeah, but Cathie's perspective on this is, well, it's pretty unique. We're going to unpack what it all means for you, though.
One of the most, I think, attention-grabbing predictions from Cathie is a potential 3% drop in real GDP growth.
For the first quarter of 2025.
But she's also forecasting this, surge in productivity.
Driven by all this new technology.
Yeah, and that's where things get interesting.
For sure.
So, first things first. What does Cathie even mean by a rolling recession?
Well, it's not your typical, across-the-board economic downturn.
Okay, so not everything is tanking all at once.
Right. She's saying that different parts of the economy have been slowing down at different times because of, the Fed's interest rate hikes.
Which started back in 2022.
Exactly.
But the key takeaway here is that she thinks we are nearing the end of this rolling recession.
Some sectors are still struggling, definitely.
But others are already showing signs of recovery.
It's an interesting time, that's for sure. And then you add in this proposed $4.5 trillion tax cut.
It's a huge number, especially on top of the existing, what was it?
$1.9 trillion from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Right. The House already passed a version of the new legislation, too.
Cathie thinks it's unlikely to change much in the Senate during reconciliation.
And what's really interesting here is how the proposed tax cuts would be retroactive.
To January 20th, 2025.
It's like they're trying to encourage immediate spending, right?
Yeah, like a jumpstart.
I read that it's based on something from the Reagan era.
Oh, yeah, the phased-in tax cuts.
Those actually made the recession last longer, didn't they?
They did. People held off on spending, waiting for the lower rates to kick in.
So this time, they're trying to incentivize spending right now.
To, boost the economy.
There's a I don't know, a political aspect of this too, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. President Trump is appealing to the lower and middle class.
With those promises of no taxes on tips, Social Security, overtime pay.
It makes it harder for critics to say the cuts just help the wealthy.
Smart. But even with this potential boost from the tax cuts, there are still some red flags, right?
Definitely, especially with the jobs picture.
The February employment report was all over the place.
The weather messed everything up, so it's hard to say what's really going on.
Kathy is worried about layoffs, though. She mentioned that Challenger survey.
Oh, yeah, the one with the 172,000 layoffs in February alone.
That's a lot. More than triple the usual amount, right?
Right. Yeah, the historical average is more like 50 to 60,000 per month.
It's still less than during the financial crisis, though.
And the tech bust in the early 2000s.
But still, the trend is concerning, right?
Definitely. And then you add in the shift in government spending.
From federal to state.
Yeah. That could mean job losses in the public sector.
It's a lot of uncertainty.
Mm.
And we can't forget about AI.
Right. It's already replacing jobs in certain sectors like chemdoom.
Yeah.
It all adds up to a lot of anxiety about job security.
But you know, amidst all this, Cathie Wood is still optimistic about the future.
Because of this productivity boom she keeps talking about.
Exactly.
And that's what we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive. We'll unpack what's driving this optimism and what it could mean for investors and workers like you. So we just talked about the rolling recession, the possible dip in GDP growth, and all the anxieties around employment. But now, let's get to the good stuff.
The optimism.
Exactly. What's fueling Cathie Wood's optimism is this, anticipated productivity boom.
It all boils down to technology, right?
Yeah, specifically, the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation.
Cathie believes these are going to unleash a wave of efficiency and productivity gains across the board.
It's kind of like when electricity and the internet were introduced,
Disruption at first, but then revolution.
Exactly. They changed how we work and live, led to huge economic growth.
It's about, looking past those short-term market jitters.
And focusing on the long game.
The market might freak out a little now, but eventually it'll reward those businesses and sectors driving this whole productivity thing.
What's really cool is that this productivity boom isn't just about economic growth.
There's more.
Cathie argues that increased productivity can also fight inflation.
How so?
When businesses can make more stuff with the same resources, or even fewer resources.
It takes pressure off prices.
Exactly.
So increased productivity is like a double whammy. Fuels growth, A&D keeps inflation down.
Win-win.
Okay, but let's get down to brass tacks here. Which sectors are leading this productivity revolution?
She's really bullish on AI, robotics, biotech, and renewable energy. That's where all the innovation is happening.
She thinks they have the potential to totally transform industries.
Lead to some serious productivity gains.
Take AI, for example. Cathie's highlighting how it can automate tasks that humans used to do.
Which frees up workers for more creative stuff.
Not only does that boost productivity.
It could lead to completely new types of jobs, ones we can't even imagine yet.
Like the internet, right? No one could have predicted social media managers or app developers 20 years ago.
Those jobs didn't exist.
It's pretty wild to think about.
It is.
But let's be real. This shift is going to come with some bumps in the road.
Definitely. Job displacement is a real concern.
People are going to need to learn new skills to stay relevant.
Education and retraining are going to be so important.
We got to equip workers with the tools they need to thrive in this new economy. Investing in STEM education, vocational training, lifelong learning, all that good stuff.
The only thing that's constant is change.
We got to embrace that, right?
For sure. And focus on prepping ourselves for this new world.
And not just skills training either.
Right. It's about developing a mindset, adaptability, creativity, always learning.
The jobs of the future are going to need people who are okay with things being a little uncertain, who can solve tough problems and are always trying to learn more.
It's not just about one specific job anymore. It's about having that growth mindset so you can change as the world changes.
But going back to Cathie Wood,
Yeah.
What makes her so confident that all these productivity gains are going to outweigh the challenges, that we're headed for a brighter future?
Well, she's looking at a few things like the crazy pace of technological advancement, the money being poured into these new technologies, and the fact that businesses everywhere are starting to use them. She sees it all coming together, building momentum towards a more productive and innovative economy.
Sounds like she's betting on human ingenuity, our ability to use technology for good.
Exactly. She knows there are challenges.
But believes that, in the long run, our ability to innovate will win out.
It's a perspective worth thinking about. We're in a time of unprecedented change with technology. It can be scary, sure.
But it's also packed with opportunity for growth, for prosperity, for progress.
But we got to remember, technology is a tool. How we use that tool, the choices we make, what we value, that's what's going to determine if all this leads to a better future or not.
It really makes you think,
Yeah.
about how all of this could change our lives and the whole economic landscape.
Absolutely.
But, what does it actually mean for us? For me, for you, for anyone listening?
Right. How might these trends affect our own investments, our career choices, all that?
Especially in the coming years.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. If Cathie Wood is right.
We could be on the edge of, a huge period of growth and change.
All driven by technology and the surge in productivity.
So if you're thinking about investing, maybe it means, paying more attention to those sectors that Cathie's so optimistic about.
The AI, robotics, biotech, and renewable energy stuff.
Those are the areas that are, set to see the most growth.
It's not just about picking individual companies, though. It's more about understanding those big picture trends.
And then positioning yourself to, ride the wave.
Exactly.
And career-wise.
Yeah.
Well, lifelong learning isn't just a nice thing to do anymore, is it?
It's essential.
The jobs of the future are going to need people who can adapt, be creative, and are willing to always be learning.
We got to be proactive, seeking out opportunities to build those in-demand skills.
Whether it's coding, data analysis, design thinking, even just becoming a better communicator.
Investing in yourself, your education. That's how you stay ahead of the game.
It's like we need to future-proof ourselves by always learning new skills, improving our existing ones.
I like that. Future-proof.
And that's where Cathie Wood's optimism really hits home for me. She's not just saying, hey, there's going to be a tech revolution.
He's got faith in us.
In our ability to adapt and, even thrive when things change.
Yeah. It's a good reminder. We can't predict the future perfectly, but we can get ourselves ready for it, for whatever it brings.
We've gone over a lot today. The rolling recession, the potential for this productivity boom, what it all means for the future. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. We can look at all the data, make predictions, but the future really depends on what WDE do.
The choices we make today, the things we invest in, the skills we develop, even our mindset, it all adds up.
It's not something that just happens to us. We build the future together. So let's keep talking about it. Let's consider different perspectives. And let's work together to build a future that's good for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Cathie Wood's analysis. It's been real.
Catch you next time.